The Navy SEAL said, "That rifle's too big for you," then watched her set the all-time sniper distance record. The cold smirk of Navy SEAL veteran Mark Dawson cut through the quiet of the shooting range as he scoffed at 24-year-old Riley Calhoun, dismissing her request for the Macmillan TAC-50 sniper rifle. "That rifle's too big for you," he said, eyes sharp with disbelief. What Dawson didn't realize was that Riley carried more than quiet determination. She inherited the legendary legacy of her father, a famed Marine sniper whose discipline and skill had been etched into her very bones. Trained in shadows and silence, Riley's steady hands and unyielding focus would soon shatter every expectation, and a record held for decades, when she fired the longest confirmed sniper shot in history. This is the story of humility, resilience, and a legacy reclaimed with every measured breath and bullet fired. And before I forget, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump in. The first time anyone at the base noticed her, it wasn't because of her name, though that name carried more weight than most uniforms in the room. It was because of the silence. She didn't talk much, didn't correct anyone when they mispronounced it, just signed in at the civilian observer desk, kept her ball cap low, and stood quietly off to the side of the training range. She looked more like a tech than a shooter, but her eyes didn't wander. She watched the firing line like someone reading a story they already knew by heart. Each breath, each flinch, each micro-correction and stance, she saw all of it. And she said nothing. Her name on the clipboard, R. Calhoun. Some recognized the last name. Fewer dared to ask. Those who knew stayed silent out of respect. Those who didn't made the same mistake that would soon echo across the base. Among the first was Chief Petty Officer Mike Brandt, a seasoned Navy SEAL who had trained some of the sharpest eyes in the field. Gruff, always chewing sunflower seeds, and never one to pass up a teachable moment. He saw her standing near the observation area, her eyes fixed on the .338 Lapua Magnum resting on the bench. "Hey," he called out to her, gesturing with his chin. "That rifle's too big for you, sweetheart. Might knock that hoodie right off your shoulders." Laughter rippled through the group behind him. Junior enlisted, a couple civilian contractors, even one of the new cadets trying not to smirk. She didn't laugh. She didn't flinch. She just turned her head slightly, studying the rifle again like she was measuring something invisible. Wind. Wait. Time. Then, "It's not the rifle," she said softly. "It's the shooter." Brandt raised an eyebrow. "You a shooter?" "No, sir," she said. "I'm a witness." That caught him off guard. Not a protest, not defiant, just something deeper, quieter. Something he didn't understand yet. The base was running long-range precision trials that week. Experimental optics. Ballistic software. Civilian observers were rare, but not unheard of. Still, she seemed different. Not just interested, but almost reverent. Like this ground meant something to her. Later that day, as others packed up gear and swapped war stories, she stood alone near the wind flags, staring toward the ridge where the 2,400-meter target shimmered under the desert heat. No camera, no notebook, just silence. One of the instructors noticed an old photo tucked into her side pocket. Worn edges, black and white. A man in full ghillie suit, kneeling beside a rifle, one hand resting on a little girl's shoulder. The caption written in faded ink. Pine Valley 2002, first lesson. She folded it away before anyone could ask. And still, not one person had seen her shoot. Not yet. That evening, the story made its quiet rounds across the range compound. R. Calhoun. Somewhere between the mess hall and the armory, whispers filled the air like dust. Is she related to Calhoun? You mean that Calhoun? Sergeant Halvorson, the range master, finally broke the tension with a quiet nod over coffee. "She's his daughter," he said. "The ghost of Pine Valley." The name landed like a dropped round. Silence followed. Master Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Calhoun, the man whose confirmed kills never made the news, whose longest shot was filed so deep in classified archives that most still thought it was legend. A sniper who trained alone, deployed without a team, and retired without a ceremony. Because men like him didn't need applause, just distance. His daughter was 5 when he left for his final rotation. She was 15 when the folded flag came home. She never spoke at the funeral, just placed a cartridge, engraved with his initials, on the casket before it was lowered. No tears. Just that. She vanished after that. Rumors floated. Some said she was living in Wyoming. Others whispered she had enlisted, then quietly disappeared from every public record. But now, she stood in the shadow of her father's legacy. Not wearing it, carrying it. And nobody knew why she was here. The following morning, she returned to the range early. Before the instructors. Before the flag was even raised. She stood behind the long bench where the sniper rifles were kept in sealed cases. Her fingers never touched the gear. She just traced the laminated wind charts pinned on the observation board. Then she reached into her pocket and unfolded a small, creased page. Not printed, handwritten. Each line was neat. Measured. A journal entry, perhaps. At the top. Formula is not equal to feeling. Trust the breath. A phrase her father had said once during a rare interview. Only a handful remembered. Then came Bran again. His tone wasn't mocking this time, just curious. You waiting on someone? She looked up. Permission, she said. Permission for what? She didn't answer, but her eyes drifted toward the .50 BMG still locked in its custom Pelican case. Brant chuckled, folding his arms. You know what that thing kicks like? She met his eyes for the first time. There was no defiance, just stillness. Like she wasn't thinking about the kick, but the distance. I felt worse, she said quietly. Later that day, her name appeared on the Observer Manifest again, but this time with an asterisk beside it. No one knew who approved it. No one questioned it either. That evening, as the sun set and the wind cooled across the flat basin, a single seat was added to the shooting line. No announcement. No formality. Just one sealed rifle case with the initials TC etched faintly on the corner. Her father's old weapon. Unmodified. Untouched. Waiting. By the third day, most had settled into a rhythm. Targets were rotating. Wind was stable. Instructors barked less. Even the SEALs had stopped posturing, except one. Logan Baines. Tall, sharp-jawed, loud in that way only men with something to prove usually are. He had been through 2 combat deployments, taught urban long-range tactics, and once held the temporary record on this very range, 2,823 meters. He carried it like a medal, like armor. And the moment he saw her take the empty seat on the firing line, he made sure everyone knew what he thought. You serious? He muttered just loud enough for the nearby shooters to hear. They let a Calhoun bring Daddy's toy out here and pretend? No one responded. Riley, she had finally introduced herself by first name, sat calmly. Adjusted nothing. Didn't open the case yet. She even zeroed that thing? Logan added. Are we just playing memory lane? Brant sighed. That rifle's been zeroed since before you were even shaving, Baines. Yeah, but not by her, he said, now stepping closer. Shooting blood doesn't pass in the genes. That's when something changed in the wind. Not the air, the room. The silence became thick. The kind that closes doors and opens consequences. Riley looked up slowly, her voice quiet as ever. I'm not here to take a record. Then what are you here for? She turned her head toward the horizon. The heat shimmered faintly over the ridge. To reach it, she said. He scoffed. That's 4 clicks. You think you can see that far? I don't need to see it, she replied. I need to feel it breathe. For a second, Logan's mouth hung half open. There was nothing to say to that. Then she stood up, slowly unlocked the case, and opened it like someone opening a family album. Inside, a matte black Macmillan TAC 50 with a slight scratch across the upper chassis. Weathered. Untouched. Revered. Every bolt, every scope adjustment had been sealed in memory. But one thing had been added. A small strip of worn cloth wrapped around the cheek rest. It had once been a piece of her father's uniform. His name, barely visible. Calhoun. She lifted the rifle like it weighed nothing. Not because it was light, but because she had already carried far heavier things. Brant gave a low nod. We'll clear a window tomorrow. Early morning. Clean air. You'll have one shot. That's all I need, she said. Some smiled at the confidence. But to those watching closely, it wasn't pride. It was something else. A tone forged not from bravado, but memory. That night, the range locked down early. No one spoke of Baines again. Not because he was wrong, but because they weren't so sure anymore. And before the sun rose, one person left a folded paper note on her bench. It read, set the wind to 0. And remember, he's watching. Before the sky even blushed with light, Riley was already kneeling beside the bench. No fanfare. No one else yet on the line. She placed the rifle down like she was laying a headstone. For 10 quiet minutes, she just sat, eyes closed, listening. Not to the wind or the birds or the distant hum of generators, but to her breath, to the memories stitched into the soil beneath her. Her father used to say, "A true shot doesn't begin when you pull the trigger. It begins the moment you forget yourself." This was that moment. Bio 600, a few instructors had gathered. A couple of junior Marines who were helping with comms. Sergeant Halvorsen stood behind the glass in the range tower, holding binoculars and a steady heartbeat. Even Brandt arrived in silence. No sunflower seeds this time. Just a faint nod and a thermos of black coffee. Logan Baines didn't speak. He didn't need to. His crossed arms and skeptical stance behind the bleachers said enough. They'd placed the target out at 3,285 meters, a full 462 meters beyond Baines's best. A record-breaking distance. Just shy of what the Canadian Joint Task Force sniper had achieved in a classified op, the longest confirmed shot in military history. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't even about numbers. It was about legacy, quiet redemption, a final breath for someone no longer here to take it himself. Riley checked her scope. Old, not digital. No smart optic. Her father's rules. She ran the bolt once. Smooth. Familiar. Brandt crouched beside her. You sure? She nodded once. Wind's low. Temps rising. Mirage will get worse if I wait. He stood, backed off. She shouldered the rifle. And then nothing. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. Stillness. Not one movement. Not one sound. Even Logan lowered his arms. Then, the breath. The slow exhale. The press. The shot broke with a sound that rolled across the basin like thunder dropped flat on concrete. It echoed, crisp and final. The spotter flinched, then trained his scope on the distant white metal plate. 1 second. 2. 3. Then, through the long static of distance and time, a faint, unmistakable ping. Dead center. Silence followed. Even the birds seemed to wait. Brandt's voice broke gently through the comms. Impact confirmed. Target struck. 3,285 meters. The range stayed quiet, not for lack of emotion, but because something sacred had just happened. And you don't speak at a funeral when the last word's just been said. Logan looked down. He didn't walk away. He didn't clap. He just stood there, his jaw slowly settling into something that looked suspiciously like regret. Riley stood up, ejected the casing. It was brass, engraved, same one from her father's funeral. She caught it midair before it touched the ground, held it to her chest, and closed her eyes. Not to celebrate, but to say goodbye. The brass casing sat on the bench like it didn't belong in this century. Polished, engraved, heavy with meaning. Not because it was rare, but because it had traveled. From battlefield to burial. From silence to story. And now, from father to daughter. Riley didn't speak. She never did after a shot like that. She simply unshouldered the rifle, cradled it like a memory, and began packing it away with careful, almost sacred movements. Each click of the latches sounded like punctuation to a sentence that had been years in the writing. The instructors stood still. The junior Marines didn't breathe. Then someone moved. It was Sergeant Halvorsen. He stepped down from the tower and approached the bench. Slowly, solemnly, as if approaching a flag-draped casket. He didn't speak. He just looked down at the casing, at the initials TC etched into its side. Then at her. Riley met his eyes. He gave a faint nod. Not approval. Not praise. Just recognition. She returned it. And then, as if the unspoken current had passed through everyone on the range, movement began again. A Marine picked up the wind flag that had come loose during the shot. Someone reset the optics. The moment was over, but not forgotten. Brandt walked past Logan Baines on the way out. He didn't stop, but he said one thing under his breath. Now you know. Logan said nothing. Back at the main office, Riley signed out of the observer log with neat, careful handwriting. When she turned to leave, the young corporal at the desk, probably barely 20, straightened in his seat. Ma'am. She paused. That shot. It'll go in the report. You know that, right? Might break the global record. Riley looked down, then offered the smallest smile. That record already belonged to him. She didn't mean Baines. She left the building in silence. Alone. In the parking lot, the late morning sun reflected off a dusty, dented pickup truck, the kind that had seen more back roads than highways. She climbed in, placed the rifle case gently across the back seat, and pulled an old photo from the visor. It was the same one from earlier, her father in the ghillie suit, kneeling beside her when she was 5. This time, she turned it over. On the back, in faded black ink. You don't need to be seen to leave a mark. Just don't miss when it's your time. She placed it back in the visor, sat for a moment, let the wind roll over the hood. Then she drove off. Not toward home, not toward press conferences or debriefings. Just forward. Because some stories don't end in noise. They echo in the silence that follows. 2 days later, the range sat quiet again. Word had spread, not by memo, not by briefing, but through that invisible chain only the military knows. From instructor to staff sergeant, from Marine to mechanic, whispered in chow lines and gear rooms. She didn't break the record. She buried it. But Riley Calhoun wasn't there anymore. She hadn't returned to claim anything. No badge, no paperwork, no celebration. The brass casing was gone. The rifle returned. That morning, Sergeant Halvorsen opened the equipment locker and found the Macmillan TAC-50 resting inside. Cleaned, oiled, wrapped in a thin gray cloth with a patch stitched into the corner. T. Calhoun, MSGT, USMC, Pine Valley. On top of it, folded precisely, was a handwritten letter. Just one line. He never missed. I just followed his breath. No name, no signature, but it didn't need one. At a quiet corner of the base, inside a glass display case that hadn't been touched in years, the kind reserved for legends, the TAC-50 now stood upright, lit by a single overhead light. Beneath it, someone had carefully placed that same gray cloth and a brass casing, polished to a shine. And though no photo accompanied the new display, everyone knew who had left it. Not the man in the frame hanging nearby, Thomas Calhoun, Pine Valley's silent ghost, but the woman no one saw coming. The range logbook for that week had one unusual entry. Under notes, scrawled in clean print. 285M confirmed. Civilian observer. Identity verified off record. Entry sealed. Someone, likely Brandt, had drawn a single red line beneath it. Meanwhile, far from base, Riley sat on the porch of a cabin in Wyoming. Snow touched the mountains in the distance, though the valley below was still warm. She had no phone out, no rifle nearby, just an old journal on her lap, one her father had left behind, filled with calculations, sketches of wind drift, target silhouettes, notes in shorthand only she understood now. She flipped to a blank page, took a breath, wrote the date, then slowly penned 3 words. Distance isn't doubt. That was something her father said when he taught her to shoot offhand at 400 meters. Back when her arms were too small for the sling, and she thought a hit from that far meant luck. He had knelt beside her, adjusted her elbow, and whispered, "Anyone can shoot close, but distance tests your faith." She had never forgotten. The porch creaked behind her. A golden retriever, older, slow, tail wagging, padded over and lay by her feet. She scratched behind his ear. "He'd have liked you," she whispered. The dog didn't move, just stayed beside her. Loyal, like her aim. 2 weeks passed. No headlines, no viral clip, no grand unveiling. Just quiet. Until a man in a pressed Navy dress uniform stepped into a diner off Highway 16, just past the Wind River turnoff. He didn't wear medals, just service pins and a small trident over his chest, polished, understated. His posture betrayed decades in the field. Not stiff, just steady. Eyes like steel beneath a calm surface. The kind of man who didn't walk. He surveyed. He sat at the far booth. Ordered black coffee. Didn't touch his phone. Riley had already noticed him the moment he walked in. Not because of the uniform, but because of the silence that followed. The cook had paused mid-sentence. The waitress adjusted her apron like a cadet in formation. Riley kept wiping the counter. Kept her head down. But the man spoke her name. Not loudly. Not as a question. Calhoun. Her hand froze over the mug she'd been drying. Then she turned. "Yes, sir." The man stood. Slowly. Respectfully. He approached, but didn't offer a handshake. He knew better. "You made the shot." She didn't answer. He nodded anyway. "I've seen the tape. Thermal drone footage. Distance verified." Still, she said nothing. "Why'd you walk away?" She looked down. "Because it wasn't my story." He considered that. Took a breath. Then reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the counter. A sealed envelope. Official. No markings. No stamp. Only her name. Handwritten. She didn't touch it. You don't have to read it, he said. But if you ever decide to stop hiding, the agency wants to talk. She raised an eyebrow. Recruitment. No. Declassification. That got her attention. He leaned in slightly, voice low, private. Your father didn't just set the record. He buried 2 others while guiding you through your first shot. You were 7. Remote Ridge. His notes mention your correction. His spotter recorded the coordinates. She stared at him. You're already part of the story, he added. You just never took the credit. Riley's voice was low, but sharp, because I didn't pull the trigger. No, he said, smiling faintly. You taught him how to read the flag that day. You don't forget things like that. He straightened his coat, finished his coffee in one long sip, then turned to leave. As he reached the door, he paused. He left something for you. The last page of his field journal. She didn't ask how they had it. She already knew. He called it the distance beyond distance. You'll know what that means. And with that, he was gone, leaving behind only the envelope. She stared at it for a long time, longer than she had stared at any scope or target. Because it wasn't just a message. It was a weight, and she was beginning to understand. Her father hadn't just trained her to shoot. He trained her to finish something he couldn't. Riley didn't open the envelope right away. She tucked it inside her coat, walked the long dirt road back to the cabin, and let it rest on the mantel for 2 full days. Unopened, unspoken. She wasn't afraid of what was inside. She was afraid of what it might ask of her. On the 3rd morning, the light hit the envelope just right, illuminating her name in soft gold tones. Not Miss, not Shooter, just Calhoun, like it had always belonged to something larger than her. She sat at the table. No music, no clock ticking, just the sound of her fingers brushing over the paper before she finally broke the seal. Inside were 2 things. A single sheet torn from an old military-issue notebook, yellowed, handwritten in her father's unmistakable script. A weathered photograph, not of him, not of her, but of a mountain range no one in the States would recognize. The note read, Riley, the world thought my last shot was the longest. It wasn't. You were there. You corrected for wind without knowing the math. You felt it. I logged the real one in the Opal file, the one I swore never to reveal. But they're watching again. And one day, you'll need to prove not just what you can hit, but what you can forgive. If you choose to go, follow the range line north of Arslan Pass. There's a rock outcrop beyond the 4th ridge. 3,720 meters. You know what to do. Dad. Riley held the page like it might crumble in her hands. 3,720 meters. That wasn't a record. That was a myth. No confirmed shot had ever reached that. Not even the Canadians. Not even the whispered CIA ghost group operations in Kandahar. If her father made that shot, and no one knew, it wasn't just for secrecy. It was for protection. She unfolded the photo, scanned the ridgeline. No GPS, no markings, but she recognized the rock formations immediately. She had seen them before. In his journal. In the sketches he used to draw when she was falling asleep as a kid. The story mountains, he called them. Only now did she realize. Those weren't stories. They were coordinates. Her breath caught in her chest. This wasn't about a record anymore. This was about a mission. A truth buried beneath miles of silence. And sealed with trust only she had inherited. She walked to the rifle case. Opened it. And for the first time in years, she added something new. A wind sensor. Modern. Precise. But still powered by instinct. Then she picked up the phone, the one she hadn't used in months, and dialed a number she had never once tried. It rang once. A voice answered, calm and unmistakable. You're calling for the Opal file. She replied, I'm going to finish what he started. The line went quiet. Then, you'll need a flight. And a new name. Riley looked out at the ridgeline far in the distance, barely visible through the Wyoming haze. No, she said. I'll need his. 2 weeks later, Riley stood at the edge of a jagged mountain range far from the familiarity of her quiet Wyoming cabin. At Arslan Pass, a remote and unforgiving place whispered about only in old field manuals and covert operational briefings. The air was thin and biting cold, each breath sharp as it entered her lungs, carrying a silence so profound it seemed to press deep into her bones, weighing heavier than any gear she wore. The sun had barely crested the horizon, casting long shadows over the rocky outcrops and frosted ridges that stretched endlessly ahead. She wore her usual gray hoodie, now weathered and slightly stained from the climb. But beneath it, a discreet tactical vest peeked out, lightweight, streamlined, designed for precision rather than brute force. There were no badges, no insignias, no overt signs of rank or affiliation. Only the quiet steel in her eyes, reflecting years of training, loss, and hard-earned resilience. Around her, a small team assembled with practiced efficiency, a blend of former military operators, trusted civilian specialists, and one or two select veterans who had earned their place through quiet loyalty, not questions. They moved with a measured rhythm, silent but purposeful. No one pried into her past, and Riley offered no explanations. Her leadership was accepted without question, the weight of her presence enough to command respect without words. Behind them, the helicopter they'd arrived on rested silently in the shadow of a steep ridge, its rotors stilled as if a ghost waiting patiently for the next call. The familiar hum of machines was replaced by the natural sounds of mountain wind and the crunch of boots on loose gravel. Riley pulled from her pack the worn leather-bound journal, her father's field notes, its pages yellowed but still crisp with decades of knowledge. She flipped through the faded ink, tracing lines of calculations, sketches of topographical maps, and coded annotations in his unmistakable handwriting. One particular entry caught her eye, the words almost glowing with meaning. Distance beyond distance, the shot no one should see. The route was marked clearly, a thin ink line winding through narrow passes and rugged valleys until it ended abruptly at a small, unassuming rock outcrop perched on the fourth ridge, her destination. The climb was brutal. The mountain demanded everything from her and the team: focus, endurance, and patience. They ascended in near silence, speaking only when absolutely necessary, conserving energy and respect for the fragile stillness of the environment. Radios were muted. Communication was mostly through subtle hand signals and the occasional glance. When they finally reached the outcrop, Riley set her pack down with careful reverence. She methodically unpacked the Macmillan TC-50. The rifle had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol, a legacy she carried not with arrogance, but solemn duty. The cold metal felt steady and familiar in her hands, just as it had years ago back on the base. Its weight was both physical and symbolic, the steady anchor grounding her in a mission far larger than herself. She placed the rifle on its bipod, adjusted the scope with a practiced hand, and brought out the advanced wind sensor, modern technology fused with decades-old instinct. She meticulously checked every environmental factor: altitude, humidity, barometric pressure, and temperature. Each detail mattered, a single variable capable of turning success into failure across the vast distance. Her breath slowed and deepened as she centered herself, recalling her father's voice echoing from memory. Distance tests your faith. This was no longer a simple record to be broken or a mark to be made. It was a solemn promise, a final chapter to a story begun long ago. The target lay far beyond anything anyone had ever shot, over 3,700 meters away, more than 2 miles, perched on a distant ridge only visible as a faint glimmer against the horizon. The team stood silently behind her, watching, not in awe, but in quiet respect, understanding that this shot represented something more profound than distance or skill. Riley lifted the rifle to her shoulder. The world seemed to narrow to a single point of focus. Her finger hovered lightly over the trigger, muscle steady, mind clear. She exhaled slowly, feeling the wind whisper across the range and the invisible weight of her father's legacy settle into the barrel. Time stretched, the moment heavy with history and hope. And then, she was ready. The air hung heavy and still atop Arslan Pass, the vast mountain ridges stretching out like endless waves of stone and shadow. Every breath Riley took was deliberate, each movement a practiced ritual carried out with the quiet precision that only years of training and deep personal resolve could forge. Her finger hovered lightly over the trigger of the Macmillan TC-50, steady as a heartbeat. She wasn't just aiming at a distant target. She was aiming at a legacy, a promise sealed years ago in silence and shadow. The sun was just beginning its slow climb over the jagged horizon, casting long golden beams that fractured through the thinning mountain air. Below her, the team waited in respectful silence, knowing this shot wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about honoring something far deeper. And then, with a breath held and a whisper of time stretching between the pull and the release, the rifle cracked. The sound rolled across the ridges, sharp and clean, yet somehow respectful, like a message sent across the ages. For a moment, the mountains themselves seemed to pause, holding their breath in witness. Far off on the distant ridge, where the tiny metal target glinted like a shard of light against the sky, a subtle shimmer caught the eyes of the spotters. A faint movement, a delicate vibration. Then, the unmistakable ping of impact. 3,720 meters. The longest confirmed sniper shot ever recorded. A distance that many had believed was myth, locked away in secret files and whispered legends. A shot that carried with it the weight of years of quiet sacrifice. Riley lowered the rifle slowly, the calm steadiness in her eyes unbroken. There were no cheers, no applause, only the heavy, solemn silence of those who understood that some victories are too profound for words. Over the comms, Logan Baines's voice finally broke the stillness, low and awed. "I don't know what to say." That was unbelievable. Riley's lips curved into the faintest, almost imperceptible smile. Not pride, not triumph, but peace. She reached into her pack and pulled out the worn leather-bound journal, her father's. Opening to the last page, she traced the single word written there in his hand. Finish. In that moment, the story came full circle. This shot was never about breaking records. It was about presence, about quiet strength carried through distance, time, and silence. And at last, about peace reclaimed. The mountains around Arslan Pass seemed to hold their breath after the shot, the kind of silence that weighs heavy, full of meaning beyond words. The echoes had faded, but the moment stretched on, lingering like a sacred hush over the rugged ridges and deep valleys. Riley remained seated on the jagged rock outcrop, the Macmillan TC-50 resting gently beside her. She didn't move much, just sat quietly, her gaze distant yet steady, fixed on the horizon where the target now lay. A tiny metal emblem of a mission completed, a promise fulfilled. Around her, the team worked methodically. No rush, no need for haste. Their movements were calm, deliberate, the kind of professionalism born from years of knowing that some moments deserve reverence more than celebration. Logan Baines approached slowly, his usual swagger stripped away by the weight of what he'd witnessed. His expression was sober, his eyes searching, finally finding a new kind of respect. He stopped a few feet away, offering a nod, a silent acknowledgement heavier than any words could be. Riley met his gaze briefly, returning the nod without a word. There was no need for explanations or apologies. The unspoken understanding was enough. She turned her attention back to the worn leather journal resting in her lap, her father's journal. Its pages were thick with years of history. The ink faded in places, but the knowledge within was as alive as ever. It carried memories, lessons, and secrets that had shaped both of their lives. Slowly, she flipped back to the last page, fingers tracing the single word written in her father's deliberate script. Finish. The word held more than instruction. It was a benediction, a release from the years of silence and burden she had carried alone. It was the final chapter in a story that had started long before her time, now finally ready to close. The sun began its descent, painting the mountains with warm, golden light that softened the harsh edges of the rocky landscape. The colors deepened, the shadows lengthened, and the day gave way to dusk. Riley finally broke the silence. Her voice was low, calm, and steady, a whisper that carried weight far beyond its volume. "This isn't the end," she said, eyes still on the horizon. "It's a beginning. For him, for me, for those who come after." The team listened intently, their faces reflecting the gravity of her words. There was no applause, no celebration, only profound respect. She carefully packed the rifle away, each movement reverent and purposeful. This rifle was no longer just a weapon. It was a symbol of resilience, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds between generations. Standing at the edge of the outcrop, Riley took one last sweeping look at the vast expanse around her, the silent mountains, the endless sky, the rugged terrain. No cameras, no crowds, no fanfare, just the quiet dignity of a promise kept and a legacy passed forward. As the team began their slow descent from Arslan Pass, Riley's silhouette against the fading light became a testament to strength found not in noise or spectacle, but in silence, precision, and honor. Back at her cabin, far removed from the biting cold and thin air of Arslan Pass, Riley sat alone at a worn wooden table. The small lantern flickered softly, casting dancing shadows across the walls and illuminating the faded, leather-bound journal alongside the unopened envelope resting side by side. For days, the letter had waited silently, sealed and heavy with unspoken truths. Now, after the shot that had redefined history, she was finally ready. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the wax seal and carefully unfolded the yellowed paper inside. The handwriting was unmistakable, her father's, deliberate, precise, and steady, even in these final words. The letter began with quiet reflection, a voice reaching across time. Riley, if you are reading this, then you have chosen the path I could not complete. You have carried the weight of our legacy with strength far beyond your years. Every shot fired, every distance reached, was guided by the same hand that steadied yours when you were a child. Her throat tightened as the memory flooded back, her father's gentle hands on her shoulders, his quiet lessons whispered in the dark. This letter is not merely a record of events, but a reminder. Our family story is woven with sacrifice, silence, and honor. What you have done is not simply about breaking records. It is about carrying forward the trust placed upon us by those who came before. Her eyes swept over the next lines, more intimate, more revealing. There are those who watch from the shadows, waiting for you to falter, but they do not see the quiet resilience that runs in your veins. The legacy lives not just in the shot, but in the discipline, the humility, and the refusal to be defined by the judgment of others. The final words read like a benediction, soft yet resolute. When doubt creeps in, remember the wind. It teaches us that true strength bends without breaking. You are the calm before the storm, the breath that steadies the aim. Finish what we began, not for glory, but for peace. Nestled within the folds of the letter was a small, folded map, its edges worn, its ink faded but still legible. Coordinates, closer this time, yet shrouded in mystery. Riley traced the lines with her fingertip, feeling the weight of new purpose settle deep within her chest. Her heart quickened, not with fear, but with a quiet determination that had been years in the making. She folded the letter carefully and placed it next to the journal. The night outside deepened, the stars scattered like distant promises across the ink-black sky. For the first time in many years, Riley allowed herself a moment of stillness, not silence, but a sacred vow. A vow that she would keep moving forward. Because legacies are not simply inherited. They are earned, shaped in the quiet moments between breath and shot. And hers was only just beginning. Days had passed since Riley returned from Arslan Pass, yet the weight of what she had accomplished settled deep inside her like a quiet ember, burning, constant, and unyielding. The solitude she once treasured was beginning to crack under the pressure of unseen forces converging from every direction. One cool evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Riley stood near the small airstrip close to her cabin. The vast Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above, tinged with hues of pink and gold, but her eyes were fixed on the gravel runway where a convoy of vehicles arrived, four black SUVs, unmarked and moving with practiced precision. From them emerged a group of individuals, men and women clothed in muted tactical gear, their faces shadowed but their demeanor calm, focused. There were no medals on their chests, no salutes, no declarations of rank or allegiance. Yet, Riley felt the unmistakable weight of shared history and purpose. These were not mere strangers. They were pieces of a puzzle formed in secrecy, a collective summoned by whispers of a legacy that refused to remain buried. Her phone buzzed sharply in her pocket, a vibration cutting through the thickening dusk. She pulled it out, eyes narrowing as an unfamiliar number illuminated the screen. A text message appeared. Coordinates received. Proceed with caution. No signature. No explanation. Just a command wrapped in trust and urgency. Riley folded the worn map with deliberate care, tucking it safely into the inner pocket of her jacket. The journey ahead was no longer simply about pushing the limits of distance or reclaiming a forgotten record. It had evolved into something far more complex, a reckoning with the shadows of her father's past and the silent watchers who had tracked their every move. The wind stirred the dry grass around her feet, carrying with it a subtle chill that hinted at the coming night. Somewhere beyond the mountains, distant engines rumbled faintly, their sound a reminder that the wider world was awake and watching. The stillness she once knew was fading, replaced by a growing storm that demanded readiness and resolve. Drawing a deep breath, Riley steadied herself against the gathering darkness. Her father's voice echoed once more in her mind, steady and unyielding. "You are the calm before the storm." And storms, she knew all too well, never came without a reckoning. With the last light fading behind the peaks, Riley squared her shoulders and stepped forward. The path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by threats she could not yet see, but her resolve was clear. She was no longer running from her legacy. She was ready to own it. Nightfall swallowed the landscape as Riley and the team slipped quietly away from the small airstrip, their movements deliberate and practiced. The moon cast a pale light through the swaying branches, illuminating a path few had traveled, and fewer still had survived. Every step was measured, every breath controlled, as they moved like shadows threading through the forest's dense embrace. Riley led without hesitation, her eyes sharp beneath the shadow of her hood. Years of training had honed her senses to an almost unnatural edge. The faintest rustle of leaves, the distant crack of a twig, the subtle shift of wind against the pines. All were warnings, whispers in the dark. The route ahead was not random. It followed a secret trail her father had carefully marked in his worn journal, a hidden artery between memory and mission. The path wound through jagged rocks, steep inclines, and thick underbrush, each turn a silent testament to lessons passed from father to daughter in whispers and maps, never spoken aloud. Whispers of their own followed them. Stories circulated in the shadowy corners of the world, rumors of watchers, silent sentinels lurking just beyond sight, men who tracked every move from a distance, waiting patiently for the smallest error. Riley could feel the weight of those unseen eyes against her back, heavy and relentless. But the burden of her legacy was far heavier. It was the steady force that pushed her forward. Hours passed as they pressed deeper into the wilderness, the cold seeping through clothes and bones alike. Finally, they reached their destination, a hidden cabin, long abandoned, cloaked in vines and the silence of forgotten years. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. A flickering lantern cast long shadows on peeling walls lined with remnants of the past. Old maps yellowed with age, faded photographs curled at the edges. These were relics of a story Riley had barely dared to confront until now. Her fingers brushed over the edges of a particular photograph, worn but unmistakable. Her father, younger, standing proud beside a squadron, a quiet hint of pain behind his eyes. On the opposite wall, a collage of framed newspaper clippings and military commendations told a story of sacrifice, secrecy, and honor. His story, laid bare in ink and paper. A sudden noise broke the silence, distant voices drifting through the trees, faint but growing closer. The team tensed instantly, weapons ready, hearts steady. Riley's voice cut through the tension, calm but firm. "They're coming. We're not done yet." This was no longer just about the longest shot or a family legacy. It was a reckoning, and the mission was only just beginning. The forest had become a chamber of silence and shadow, the kind that presses on the chest and slows the heartbeat. Riley and her team moved like phantoms in the cold night, every step deliberate, every breath controlled, their senses stretched taut like the bowstrings they'd never release. They were no longer just pursuers or the pursued. They had become the final barrier between a truth buried too deep and the silence that threatened to consume it. Outside the decrepit cabin, the murmurs of approaching footsteps echoed through the trees, growing louder with each passing moment. The watchers had arrived, figures clad in dark tactical gear, faces obscured by masks, eyes sharp and calculating beneath the moonlight. Their movements were professional, methodical, like seasoned predators circling prey. Riley's grip tightened on the Macmillan TC-50 slung across her back, the cold metal a reminder of the legacy she carried and the discipline forged from years of rigorous training. Her mind was clear, muscles steady. This was no reckless firefight. It was a battle of wills, a test of control and resolve. With a subtle gesture, she signaled the team to spread out, taking up positions that maximized their cover while maintaining clear lines of sight. The cabin, though battered by time and neglect, was a fortress in its own right. Thick wooden walls, narrow windows, and a vantage point overlooking the clearing where the watchers circled. The encircling figures communicated in hushed tones over radios, their voices crackling softly in the tense air. But Riley noticed something unexpected: hesitation. A flicker of recognition in their movements, a momentary pause that suggested they knew who she was. Or perhaps they thought they did. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence, cold, commanding, and unmistakably familiar. "Riley Calhoun." It intoned, the words carrying a weight that seemed to pull the night stiller. "You've come far. But this ends here." Riley stepped into the lantern's flickering glow, her posture calm, her gaze unwavering. There was no fear, no anger, only the quiet certainty of someone who had carried burdens unseen and unspoken for years. "It ends only when the truth is told," she replied, her voice steady and resolute. For a suspended moment, the night held its breath. No shots rang out. No threats were shouted. Instead, the tension crackled in the space between them. Unspoken histories, secrets too long kept, and a legacy demanding reckoning. Then, with a barely perceptible signal, Riley's team moved, not with violence, but with the precision of a scalpel. They advanced swiftly to disarm and subdue the watchers, their actions controlled and deliberate, demonstrating that strength need not be loud to be absolute. When the dust settled, Riley approached the leader, a man whose face bore scars of battles past and the weight of regret. His eyes met hers with a complexity that spoke of duty and doubt intertwined. "You don't understand what you're protecting," she said softly, the words carrying both accusation and invitation. He looked away, the weight of her truth pressing down, then nodded slowly. "Maybe not yet." The night ended not in bloodshed, but with a fragile truce, a promise that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, could no longer remain in shadow. Under the expanse of stars, Riley stood alone, feeling the weight of the past begin to lift, if only just enough to breathe. Her legacy was no longer hidden. It was alive. The first light of dawn spilled gently over the rugged valley, softening the edges of the night's cold shadows. The golden hues touched the worn cabin, its weathered walls bearing silent witness to decades of untold stories and quiet resilience. Riley stood alone at the edge of the clearing, the cool morning air crisp against her skin, yet charged with a sense of renewal and profound calm. It was a stillness that spoke of endings and beginnings, a moment suspended between what was and what would be. Her eyes lifted to the pale sky, where the earliest birds began their tentative songs, tentative notes weaving through the crisp mountain air like fragile promises. In that quiet moment, Riley felt the weight she had carried for so many years, burdens of loss, secrecy, and unspoken legacy, begin to lift, as if the very mountains themselves were exhaling a long-held breath of relief. Inside the cabin, the leather-bound journal lay open on the wooden table, its pages a tapestry of inked wisdom and memories. Each stroke of her father's pen whispered lessons of discipline, sacrifice, and honor that had shaped both their lives in ways words could barely capture. Beside it, the folded letter rested quietly, a testament to a promise fulfilled, a journey completed, and a truth finally spoken. No applause awaited her arrival. No crowds gathered to celebrate her triumph. There were no medals pinned on her chest, no headlines screaming of records broken or battles won. Instead, there was something far more profound and enduring: quiet dignity, a legacy restored not through spectacle or noise, but through presence, resilience, and unyielding strength. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, the screen illuminating with a message from an unknown number. "You have done what few could. The path is yours now. Walk it with honor." A faint smile touched Riley's lips, subtle and serene, born not of pride, but of acceptance and resolve. She stepped outside, drawing a deep breath of the pure mountain air. Each inhale reminded her that this was her path, one forged through silent strength, unwavering discipline, and a history carried with humility and grace. Behind her, The cabin stood as a monument, not just to the past, but to the future, a beacon of what had been endured and what was yet to come. Riley adjusted the strap of her pack, feeling its familiar weight settle comfortably on her shoulder, grounding her in the present while carrying the past forward. She did not look back, because some legacies are not simply inherited. They are claimed, and hers was hers to command. With steady, purposeful steps, Riley walked into the rising sun, her silhouette a quiet testament to a warrior who had reclaimed her place, not through noise or violence, but through precision, honor, and unbreakable presence. The story was no longer just about a record or a rifle. It was about a legacy, living, breathing, and unstoppable. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive tactical stories.